When David inherited the cabin, it came with no explanation. An envelope arrived in his mailbox with just a key, a set of GPS coordinates, and a legal document from an uncle he hadn't seen in over 20 years. There were no roads to the cabin, just a 2-mile hike through pine-thick woods in rural Vermont. David, a freelance photographer from Boston, thought it might be the escape he needed after the breakup. Solitude, clean air, a mysterious cabin, maybe inspiration too. The first thing he noticed when he arrived was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. The kind where you notice what's missing. No birdsong, no insects, no wind. Just that kind of stillness you only hear in a recording studio or a sealed tomb. The cabin itself was old but intact. A-frame, dark cedar wood, moss creeping over the stone foundation. It leaned slightly to one side, like it had once tried to rise from the earth and thought better of it. The door creaked open too easily. The wood hadn't warped at all. Inside, everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except the table. The table was set with 3 wooden bowls. One of them had a spoon resting on the edge. He hadn't eaten yet, and he was alone. He was sure of that. The fireplace was cold but clean. The furniture, mismatched but arranged like someone had just stepped out. There was no electricity, but a cabinet full of ancient oil lamps and matches. He didn't plan on staying long the first night. Just settle in, light a fire, test the camera gear. But something about that first bowl unnerved him. He hadn't touched it, yet it looked used. That night, as he lay on the cot under a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and mothballs, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, inside the cabin. But when he shot up and lit the nearest oil lamp, there was no one there. The bowls were gone. In their place was a new note, hand-scrawled in the same ink as the envelope back home. "You're not the only one who inherited this place." David didn't sleep that night. He sat upright in the wooden chair near the window, the oil lamp burning low, crackling faintly like it too was nervous. He kept staring at the spot where the bowls had been. The table was now bare, dust creeping back across the surface like mold reclaiming flesh. That note sat in his hand, edges damp from sweat. Was it a prank? Has someone followed him up here? He thought back to the hike. The trees had stood so still. Nothing had moved but him. He'd seen no other footprints, no tire tracks. And yet someone had been here. The next morning, he convinced himself to stay. He told himself it was curiosity, a photographer's instinct. But the truth was quieter, harder to face. He was afraid that if he left, whatever had found him here would follow. By noon, David explored the rest of the cabin. The attic was mostly empty except for old quilts and a box of broken picture frames. He picked one up. The glass was shattered. In the photo was a man who looked unsettlingly like himself. But not quite. A thinner jaw, paler eyes. The man's hand rested on the shoulder of someone whose face had been scratched out. Violently, repeatedly. As David stared, he realized the wallpaper behind the man in the photo was the same as the cabin walls around him. That photo was taken here. Downstairs, in the kitchen, he discovered something else. Behind a tall cabinet pushed into the corner was a second door. Narrow, almost vertical, like a dumbwaiter or servant's passage. He hesitated. His breath fogged the air, though it wasn't cold. The door opened with a soft groan. Beyond it was a dark stairway, leading down. The air turned instantly colder, metallic. Not the clean chill of nature, the bitter staleness of a place sealed too long. He didn't go down. Not yet. That night he heard breathing. Not in the room, under it. And then came the whisper, barely audible over the wind that had finally begun to stir the trees outside. "Don't forget who you are." David spun, lamp raised. Nothing. But when he turned back to the cot, he saw something that hadn't been there before. A photograph. It was him sleeping, from above. But he hadn't slept. Had he? The photo wouldn't burn. David had tossed it into the fireplace, watched it blacken, and yet when he turned away, it was back, resting on the table like it had always been there. His own sleeping face staring up at him from glossy paper. Except this time, something was different. In the background, barely visible, a shape in the rafters. David stared for nearly an hour, the oil lamp spitting shadows across the cabin walls. He checked the rafters above his cot, climbed up and ran his fingers across the beams. Dust thick enough to write in. No footprints, no rope, nothing. Still, something gnawed at the edge of his mind. A familiar feeling, like the edge of a dream trying to wake him. He looked again at the photograph. The expression on his sleeping face disturbed him more than anything. It was peaceful. Content, wrong. He hadn't felt peace since he arrived. The next morning, the light outside was gray and directionless. He stepped out onto the porch, expecting birds or the rustle of leaves, but the forest remained lifeless. He lit a cigarette, one of the few he had left, and tried to calm the buzzing in his ears. That's when he saw it. Another cabin, not far, maybe 100 yards through the trees down a slope. He was sure it hadn't been there the day before. There were no trails, no clearing, just dark timbers half swallowed by fog and pine. Windows stared back at him like closed eyes. He should have felt relief. Maybe someone to talk to, someone who could explain all this. But all he felt was repetition, like he was seeing something he'd already seen, and not in the way memories work, but like the world itself was looping. Still, he approached, slowly. Each step down the slope felt heavier. He reached the door and knocked. It creaked open. Inside, the layout was the same. Exactly the same. The same table. The same fireplace. The same wool cot. And there, on the table, were 3 wooden bowls. But this time, all 3 had been used. The second cabin was colder. Not from lack of fire, it felt colder, as if the walls were exhaling frost through the grain. The bowls on the table weren't just used, they were wet, still streaked with something dark and viscous. He touched the rim of one. Warm. He called out, "Hello?" No answer. The air was dense, as if sound had to swim through it. He walked slowly to the fireplace. It was lit. No, had been lit. The embers glowed faintly beneath charred wood. Someone had been here recently. He turned to leave, but his eyes caught something on the floor. A shoe print, but it was his size. His tread. He knelt down, heart thumping, and placed his own foot beside it. The print matched perfectly. Then another print, and another, leading toward the stairs, up this time toward the attic. He should have left. Instead, he climbed. The steps groaned under his weight. The attic above was shrouded in shadow despite the daylight leaking through cracks in the wood. It smelled of dry cloth, rust, and something subtler like copper and candle smoke. A trunk sat in the center of the room. It looked identical to the one in his own attic. He knelt and opened it. Inside were clothes. His clothes. Shirts he'd left in Boston. A wristwatch he hadn't seen in years. A camera lens he thought he'd lost in college. Suddenly, a soft thud behind him. He turned fast, heart stuttering. A photograph had slid from between the attic rafters and landed face up. It showed him standing in the second cabin's attic. Just like now. But behind him in the photo, crawling halfway up the stairs, was a shape pale, long-limbed, its eyes black voids. He turned. No one was there. But the attic steps were now wet with fresh footprints, leading down. Not his. David didn't remember running back to the original cabin. One moment he was on the attic stairs, staring at wet footprints. The next, he was locking the door behind him, chest heaving, throat dry, arms trembling. His shoes were soaked with mud and pine needles. His hands smelled like blood. Had he fallen? Had he been touched? No, there were no marks. Just a haze in his mind, thick and sludgy, like trying to remember the end of a bad dream before it dissolved. He sat at the table, head in hands. The photo he'd seen in the attic burned into his memory. Himself, frozen, unaware. Something watching from behind. Something wrong. He stood, looking for the photo from earlier, the one of him sleeping, but it was gone. The table was clear again. The fireplace cold. That's when he noticed the clock. There had never been a clock before, but now an antique one ticked above the hearth. Slowly, too slowly. The second hand crawled forward, then back, then forward again. It read 2:17. He checked his phone. It was off. He hadn't remembered turning it off. He turned it on. 2:17 p.m. The signal bar blinked once, then vanished. The screen dimmed, then died. In the silence, something new emerged. A whispering. Not outside. Not in the walls. In the rooms. He moved from kitchen to hall, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint the source. The voice wasn't clear, like someone humming a memory too faint to remember. but it followed him, always one room behind. Finally, he flung open the attic door and shouted, "Who are you?" Silence. Then from below, from the basement door behind the cabinet, came the sound of something falling. David turned slowly. The door was open. It hadn't been before. The stairs beyond descended into absolute blackness. A whisper rode up the cold air, brushing his ear like breath. "You've already been down." David backed away, bumping into the table. The bowls were back. Now 4 of them, each one used, each one still warm. David stood at the basement door, the air pressing against his skin like cold cloth soaked in breath. The darkness beyond the steps wasn't natural. It absorbed the light. Even when he lifted the oil lamp and tilted it down, the flame seemed to shrink away from the threshold, as if frightened to enter. The whisper had stopped. Now there was only silence. He descended. The stairs groaned. Old wood warping under him like it was trying to forget how to hold his weight. 10 steps. 20. The cold deepened. The air thinned. When his feet touched the basement floor, the lamp flickered violently. He spun in a circle. No walls. No ceiling. The basement wasn't a room. It was a void. And in the center, a chair. A single wooden chair, facing away from him. There was someone in it. His voice cracked the silence. "Hello." No answer. He stepped closer. Each footfall echoed like it was falling into water, though the floor felt solid. Then he saw it. The figure was wearing his jacket. Not one like it his. The stitching, the tear near the sleeve, the exact faded green. "Who?" he whispered, then stopped. The figure turned its head slightly, just enough to reveal part of the jaw. It was him. Older. Hollow-eyed. The skin looked waxy, too still. David staggered back. The lamp jerked in his hand and flared, casting shadows across the nothingness, and for a moment he saw others. More figures standing at the edges, unmoving. Each wore familiar clothes. Each face was blurred, half-melted, as if someone had tried to sculpt him from memory and failed. He dropped the lamp. It shattered, plunging him into pitch. For a full minute he didn't move, breath caught in his throat. Then, a voice. His own voice. From the chair. "It's not the place that's remembering." David turned and ran. Up the stairs, hands scraping wood, breath ragged. Behind him, the whisper returned, not following this time. "Welcoming." When he burst back into the cabin, morning sunlight was pouring through the windows. But the clock read 2:17, and the bowls were gone, replaced by a single mirror. And in its reflection, David saw himself. Except, he was still holding the lamp. Unbroken. Still lit. David stared into the mirror, heart thudding like it was trying to warn him. The reflection looked back, his face, his eyes, the folds of his jacket. But the lamp in the mirror flickered wrong, casting light in the opposite direction. The flame bent unnaturally, like it recognized something he didn't. He lifted his hand. The reflection did too, but slower. Half a second behind. He moved again. It lagged once more. Then smiled. He hadn't smiled. David recoiled, knocking the mirror off the table. It didn't break. It landed with a flat, soft thud like it had fallen onto something alive. The mirror showed the ceiling now, but the ceiling wasn't the same. It was higher, angled, beamed. The reflection was showing the other cabin's ceiling. David picked it up slowly, his hands shaking. In the reflection, someone stood behind him. He turned. No one there. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was closer now, blurred, moving slowly like it was underwater. He threw a blanket over the mirror and shoved it into the cupboard beneath the sink. Slammed the door. Locked it with a rusted hook he hadn't noticed before. Then silence. Long, too long. He checked his phone again. Dead. He opened his bag. Every camera lens was cracked. Every photo card corrupted. Every item of clothing had gone damp, as if soaked in fog. On the floor near his cot, he noticed something new. A piece of folded paper. It was from a journal. His own handwriting. Day 3. I found the mirror again. I keep hiding it, but it always comes back. I think the cabin is learning my thoughts. I think it wants me to become it. I think I already have. David dropped the page. He had never written those words. He'd never kept a journal. Had he? He checked his backpack again. Underneath a bundle of shirts, he found a leather-bound notebook. Worn smooth, the pages filled with his handwriting. Entries he couldn't remember writing. Some dated next week. One page read, "Stop reading now. If you read this, you'll finish becoming me. Then, a knock at the door. 3 soft taps. He stood still. Another knock from inside the attic. The knock echoed through the cabin like bone-on wood. Slow, soft, deliberate. Not the wind, not a branch. Someone was waiting in the attic. David didn't move at first. He listened. 1 heartbeat, 2, then 3 more knocks, louder this time. He grabbed the oil lamp, even though he was certain he had shattered it in the basement. It was warm in his hand again, freshly lit. The glass no longer cracked. He stepped toward the attic door, unsure whether he was acting of his own will. Each movement felt distant, like he was inside someone else's body. The door opened with a soft creak. Dust curled down the steps like breath. He climbed. The attic was brighter than before. Pale sunlight poured through the gaps in the boards, illuminating shapes beneath dust covers. Chairs, trunks, a tall mirror leaning crookedly in the corner. And a man, standing with his back turned. David froze. The man was identical to him, same clothes, same posture, same slight slump in the left shoulder. He didn't move, just stood still, staring out the gapped window into the woods. David tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Who are you?" The man slowly turned his head, not fully, just enough for David to glimpse the side of his face. It was his face, but the eyes were completely black. Not hollow, filled with something inky, seething just beneath the surface. "I'm the part that stayed," the figure said, voice soft and toneless. "You left once before. You forgot. You always forget." "I never," David started, but the attic changed around him. In a blink, the light shifted. Dust vanished. The objects were rearranged. Now the attic looked lived in. A blanket on the floor. A notebook. Empty bowls stacked in the corner. David backed away. "No, this isn't mine. I never—" "Yes," the figure interrupted, stepping forward. "You came here years ago. You left a piece behind. It grew into me. You left again. You came back. You forgot again." "Stop!" The figure kept walking. "You wrote the journal. You made the photos. You fed the guest. I didn't feed anything. Didn't you?" The figure smiled. "You sleepwalk. You always have." David turned and fled down the stairs. But the cabin had changed. The stairs led not to the kitchen, but into another cabin. Another. The bowls were on the table again. Now there were 5. David stood frozen in the doorway of the new cabin. Same architecture. Same cold stillness, but this one felt different, older. The wood beneath his feet was warped, not by age, but by pressure. As if many feet had paced the same circles over and over. The smell was stronger too. Dampness and rot, yes, but something sweeter, like overripe fruit or breath gone stale. He stared at the 5 bowls on the table, all used. One still steaming. One had a spoon in it. He approached slowly, each step accompanied by the faintest creak, like the cabin was listening. The bowls weren't just dirty. Inside each was something organic, soft, fibrous, reddish. He didn't look closely, couldn't. His stomach turned. Then he noticed the 6th place setting. Clean bowl, empty, waiting. A chair scraped behind him. He spun. Nothing there. He backed toward the front door, but where it had been was now only mirror. Wall to wall, floor to ceiling. Dozens of reflections. Some stood, some sat, some stared. Not all were him. Not exactly. One had no eyes. One smiled too wide. One stood perfectly still as others flickered like candlelight. A few just watched him with dull recognition, as if waiting their turn. He whispered, "I'm dreaming." A dozen mouths moved with his. One did not. It nodded instead. The sound of a journal page turning. He turned toward the table again. A notebook now lay beside the bowls, leather cover scratched with a symbol, a circle split in half, one side light, one dark. He opened it. The first entry, arrival, day 1. He doesn't remember me yet, but he will. The next page, day 14. One of us has to stay. One of us always does. I remember now. I remember too much. The final page, day? I fed the guest again, but it's still hungry. The room pulsed like the walls were breathing. A sound upstairs. Slow footsteps. Familiar weight. David stepped backward, eyes locked on the ceiling as dust rained down from above. He reached the door again, now back where it belonged. And waiting outside was a line of cabins stretching off into the fog, each one flickering in and out of view, each one with a light on. David stepped outside into the cold mist. The ground crunched faintly underfoot, though he couldn't see what he stepped on: pine needles, bones, glass? His legs felt heavier with each stride, as if gravity had thickened. Before him, cabins, row after row reaching deep into the forest like a procession of tombstones. Each identical, each flickering slightly like unstable memories trying to hold shape. Some cabins glowed dimly, others were dark. One had a fire blazing. Another had its door cracked open, just like the first one had when he arrived. He turned to look behind. The cabin he had just exited was gone. There was only forest, and fog, and himself standing alone. No path, no wind, no sound. Then footfalls beside him. He looked left. Another version of himself. Blood on the collar. Eyes glazed. Staring forward. Another to the right. Older. Pale. Swaying slightly. Mumbling. More versions began emerging from the woods. Dozens. All him. All walking slowly, silently toward the line of cabins. Some limped. Some wept. A few whispered to themselves. One stared straight at David. "You don't remember the first time either," it said, voice hollow and cracked. "That's how it begins. Every time." David backed away. "No, I'm not part of this. I'm me." The version of himself blinked slowly. "You said that last time."